President Trump is gearing up for mass layoffs as the federal government shuts down. Is he admitting at last that Project 2025 was on the books all along? And can the US economy actually survive Trump's brilliant negotiations with the Democrats? I'm Paul, US Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. By the way, hit subscribe. That makes a difference. And also, of course, you guys know it's fall and Strike Gum is having its fall sale. Buy 2 of any pack of gum, any size, and get 1 free, right? It's got 90 milligrams of caffeine. That's as much as this entire energy drink. One piece of this has the same caffeine as this bad boy. 0 sugar, 100 milligrams alpha GPC, made in the USA. We haven't raised our prices in 2 years because we're here to do it right, right? This isn't even a sponsor. This is literally my company. It's veteran owned by this veteran. So go to strikegum.com. Okay. U.S. government has the White House come out and said, okay, you Democrats, if you don't want to approve our insane spending bill, the government, right, legally has to shut down operations because it is unfunded. But the White House has said, hey, actually, we are going to be firing 750,000, nearly 1 million federal workers. Now, you might ask yourself, well, wait, what is this furlough shutdown thing? And I can offer you some insight because I was a Fed, and I was actually the Fed during the last shutdown. So let's break it down a little bit, what goes on. So the federal government, by law, needs money to fund operations. And under the Constitution, the only entity that can fund the U.S. government's operation is Congress. So if Congress doesn't approve a federal budget, there is no federal budget. And the issue is that in the Senate, they need to have 60 votes to pass legislation. And so in this case, that means they need at least some centrist Democrats to go over and fund their, agree to a budget. And the U.S., the Democrats have said, listen, we gave you, the Trump administration, a chance to pass your budget. We passed a continuing resolution. And we didn't shut down the government. We played ball. And what did you do? The answer is you screwed us. You actually said some horrible stuff, and you did some things to really screw our constituents at a level that is actually pretty preposterous. And a lot of the Democratic Party base said, yo, you guys signed off on some insane shit in this spending bill. And so now the Democratic Party has said, listen, you have to curtail this stuff. Particularly, they've said you have to restore the cuts you've made to Medicare and Medicaid. Because in doing so, you are going to take people who have access to healthcare and you're going to deprive them of that access. And in the process, some of them are going to die. Like, I don't know how the Democrats can't message this. I haven't heard a single Democratic politician just say the reality that when you kick people off Medicare, they die because they don't want to incur the expenses of going and getting preventative care, right? Somebody who was supposed to have a cancer screening is going to miss it and die. That's just a statistical reality. Somebody who needs their insulin is not going to be able to afford it, is going to go without, and they're going to die. Like, that is a reality. And so the Democrats have said, no, you can't do this one, guys. You gotta dial it back. And the White House is like, no. And, we're in negotiations. We'll try. There's a compromise somewhere, right? At least that's what every other White House has always said, right? But until that spending goes through, the problem is that the government cannot operate without money, mostly. So what does that mean? That means I'm going to say about 2/3 of the federal workforce. That means they are told, you are an employee, you don't work on a volunteer basis, you cannot perform work, right? They've said but the problem is you also cannot take outside work. So you're employed by the federal government, but you cannot perform any kind of operations. And that includes as little as logging into a laptop. Now, in some cases, the federal government says, listen, in order to receive the instruction to return, you are allowed to check as much as once a week. But literally, forwarding an email is a violation of federal law because you are conducting unfunded operations, right? And but there are some federal operations that are so sensitive and so important that they simply cannot be allowed to cease. And so, for example, if you are in a federal penitentiary, right, you can't simply have the guards not show up. You can't simply have the people that prepare and serve the food not show up, right? That just can't happen. So the federal government says, listen, if you are, again, essential, you're a prison guard, you are an FBI agent, like arresting a terrorist, you have to show up to work, but you still can't get paid, but you are still legally required to show up to work. And so you can see how that for a couple of days when this sort of thing happens, if this happens for 2-3 days while some negotiations play out, it's not great, but it's not the end of the world, right? But the problem is there's a big difference between, the Fed, like people are going to starve versus regular federal operations where they say, okay, tomorrow it's not going to be the end of the world. For example, if VA, like in most cases, like administering VA benefits, most benefits aren't going to get administered. They say it's not the end of the world if veterans aren't going to get their burial benefits. But over time, that becomes a bigger and bigger problem. The best example is actually in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, where, okay, is it a big deal if for 2 days there's a delay in releasing federal data? Nah, not really. But what happens if it goes on for a month? Well, what about for a quarter? What happens if there's no statistical data being collected at all about the US economy? That's a huge problem, right? And so that's sort of the danger, is that short-term shutdowns aren't really that big a deal for people, but long-terms, it's a huge problem. On a long-term basis, it becomes massively problematic. And so this, I think, but the real story here, honestly, is the White House's insane negotiations. Now, you might recall that the White House has failed to negotiate a ceasefire in Gaza. White House has failed to negotiate any kind of peace in Ukraine. In fact, both of those wars have escalated tremendously since the White House has decided to help. And the White House is now taking that same brilliant negotiating strategy and putting it out into the Democrats, right? And putting it out into this delicate interbranch negotiation. So let's take a look at some of the president's choices. So one, he says, listen, we're not just going to furlough these federal employees. That's the term for an employee who's told, hey, you're still employed by the federal government, you just can't work, right? He said, actually, we're going to fire them. And it's not clear that you can legally fire them, but it's also not clear that anyone's going to be able to do anything about it. So they say, listen, we're going to actually can almost 1 million federal workers, which is not something the White House has to do. The White House is choosing to do so. In fact, President Trump has come out. He says, listen, yeah, I'm meeting today with Russell Vought, he of Project 2025 fame, to determine which of the many Democrat agencies, which FYI, that's not how this works. President Trump controls all federal agencies. They are all Republican agencies. He said most of which are a political scam, which again, we had Doge, and Doge did shut down some agencies that it declared scams. They weren't. Anything he recommends to be cut, whether or not those cuts will be temporary or permanent. I can't believe the radical left Democrats gave me this unprecedented opportunity. They are not stupid people, so maybe this is their way of wanting to quietly and quickly make America great again. So this is one, Project 2025 is a conservative outline, a conservative playbook that was actually so politically radioactive. It included so many terrible things that would be so unpopular that President Trump said he had never heard of it, that he had nothing to do with it, that it was a Democrat hoax to pin this radical project onto him. So the fact that he's now saying, actually, I love the author and I love the project, and now I'm going to be implementing it, that's not a great strategy to get to the Democrats to come to the table. In fact, again, to the average Democrat voter, they're saying, wow, we should never restore funding to this government because, well, he's going to do this thing that is pretty horrible. And you also, of course, the president says, well, I'm going to actually be firing and shutting down many agencies that provide social services. And that's what he means by Democrat agencies. That's generally what he's meant. And so, again, the problem is that these social services, right, these things that provide housing assistance or other stuff, they're very popular, and they're often very popular in right-wing states. Look at what percentage of Missouri, for example, a very conservative state, is on Medicare, Medicaid. The answer is a lot. And so the fact that he is like, hey, I'm going to start negotiations by threatening to do things that you hate is pretty wild. But then to also say, hey, I'm going to also volitionally put 1 million people on the unemployment line is actually like kind of fucking insane. And let me show you why. You might recall that the latest jobs report is terrible. It actually says that the U.S. economy shed 32,000 jobs, and reported hiring plans are at the lowest level since 2009. The long-term unemployed share increased to its highest point in years, with 1.9 million people jobless for 27 weeks or more, right? And this is a huge problem because it's a sign that the U.S. economy's labor market is contracting. Normally, what happens in a contracting labor market, it means there's a contracting economy, that inflation is also falling, so that you can start to see this realignment between wages and employment. The problem is inflation is still really high, and you have jobless numbers. You have this stagflation, which is a brutal economic combination. The bigger problem is that I want you to understand that a net loss of 32,000 jobs is like a flashing red alert for the economy. So I want you to understand that imagine 20 times that, right? The administration plans to create 20 times that number of unemployed people, close that 20 times that number of jobs, and force these people, right, to compete for the few job openings that still exist in the economy. But remember, the government isn't just the private sector. There are tons of private sector economy or private sector companies that get some or all of their revenue from the government, and that revenue is not funded. So if you are Lockheed Martin or Raytheon or even a company like Microsoft, these are companies that provide multi-billion-dollar services to the US government, and they will not get back pay. They are not going to get paid for this. So again, if Lockheed Martin doesn't get their direct deposit from the federal government from manufacturing F-35s, if they don't get it for 2 or 3 days, it's not a problem. But if you don't get it for 30 days, for Lockheed, it's a crisis, right? It represents, again, a third of your quarter. You just had your revenue drop to zero. And how many F-35s can you build? Or how many, if you're Microsoft, how many data centers can you run when you have no income to support this? So the fact that the president is sitting there and saying, I'm going to blow up this economy if you don't give me what I want. Oh, but I'm going to implement this massively unpopular project. The Democrats are like, what? I don't understand. Like, this is Trump is saying, like, you're the president and you're going to fire these people. Like, you don't have to fire us. Again, he was president during the previous shutdown. I was one of those federal employees. Like, it sucked. It sucked having to, I was with my wife at the time and we just sort of relied on her salary, right? But a lot of feds can't do that. A lot of couples are dual federal couples. And so suddenly you are already forcing them into temporary unemployment, and you're going to make that permanent for no reason. So that's already, they're like, that's kind of bad. And as we discussed, he's going to crash the economy. He's going kind of full Bane. He's saying, I'm going to crash this economy with no survivors if you don't approve my spending bill, which is some like abusive spouse level of negotiations, where they say, it's your fault. If you hadn't gone out to the grocery store, I wouldn't be so mad punching holes in the house. It's literally like, that's where we're at. The Democrats are literally like, hey, can you adjust the spending levels on this Medicare, Medicaid thing? And he goes, if you make me adjust these spending levels, I'm going to burn this house to the ground. And they're like, you're a crazy person, and I don't really want to negotiate with you, right? You're also like, if you burn the house to the ground, like that's your fault. People are going to hate you for it. But here's the thing. President Trump also, despite needing to negotiate with the Democrats, he's also relying on a secret mechanism he has, which is to denigrate and humiliate the people he's negotiating with. This is from his Truth account, by the way, in which he says the party of hate, evil, and Satan, the Democratic Party is dead. They have no leadership, no message, no hope. Their only message for America is to hate Trump. So I want to point out that if I'm negotiating, let's say, for a used car, and the person says to me, hey, you're a Satanist and pure evil, I'm going to go ahead and say, I don't care how good your car is, go stick it up your ass. Now, admittedly, the Democratic Party in the United States has no discernible spine, and Chuck Schumer may not even be old, and maybe so old that his rotten brain may not actually be able to understand he's being insulted. But if even Donald Trump can levy this level of insult, perhaps we can actually find a Democratic Party that says, wow, sucks to suck, man. Like, go pass your own bill, dumbass. Like, it would warm my heart to see an American politician say, wow, you insulted me. Maybe you can run the country your damn self. Good luck out there, bro. Now, I want to point out that the Republicans have their own message. They say, listen, the Democrat concern over Medicare and Medicaid, he goes, it's actually a conspiracy to give your healthcare money to illegal aliens and open our borders to the criminals of the world, a deadly combination because everyone will come. Now, I tried to run this one down, and thankfully, BBC, who is not even a U.S. broadcaster, so they really don't have a dog in this fight, so it sort of broke it down. And the BBC actually reached out to the White House for evidence to say, show us what you're talking about. And then they shared a post from a Twitter account, which is obviously a source of objective truth, which is a screenshot from the Democrats' proposed continuing resolution. And it says that it will repeal some of the healthcare changes in the tax and spending bill. A key change is that they want to, Republicans have restricted federally funded healthcare for non-citizens, right? The Alien Medicaid Eligibility Provision, which says that if you're here in the United States, you also could qualify for Medicaid. Now, like, what the Democrats say is if you're lawfully present in the U.S., so you're lawfully in the United States, you can also apply for Medicaid just like everyone else. They point out things people like who have entered under refugee status or under victim of crime visa or victims of trafficking visas, right? This is a tiny, vanishingly small number of people. But I think what's important is that that's not what the Republicans are saying. As we pointed out, he says he wants to give it to illegal aliens who have entered without legal status. But this is lawful. The exact quote is lawfully admitted permanent residents and other lawful categories. So this is just not true, right? Now, again, of the something like 10 to 20 million Americans that are going to be uninsured, they say about 1.4 million lawfully present immigrants might also become uninsured. And there's not really any system nationally in which undocumented immigrants get free healthcare. Right? They can get emergency Medicaid because of an 1886 law, but like hospitals also get reimbursed sometimes through Medicaid if they end up providing a basic medical care for individuals who might, low-income individuals, even if they are here illegally. But this is like, okay, a hospital will get paid if they treat someone who's like got a gunshot wound. This is just like, this is just not it. Nothing in here is like free healthcare for illegals from, nothing in here is free healthcare for illegal migrants. So again, this whole thing is, it's sort of a farce, but as I always point out, the only entity polling worse than President Trump, someone who literally stood in front of military generals as like, we're going to war with American citizens, and somehow the Democrats poll worse because, as discussed, they lack, they're like the opposition party. They're supposed to be the immune system for the country, right? They're supposed to say, hey, the people in charge are doing some crazy things. We need to stop it. And like an 80-year-old with leukemia, they're not functioning. The white blood cells are not fighting the infection. They're not fighting at all. And so the fact that finally they have this sort of milquetoast form of resistance, and the president is meeting them not with capitulation and negotiation, but with insults, is, and absolutely bonkers levels of lies, is honestly, I'm shocked. I'm shocked that the Democratic Party is standing up. I'm less shocked that the art of the deal, his response is to threaten them and then call them Satan worshipers. So again, this is one of the takes of all time. This is completely insane, but it sounds messed up. But I think that ultimately this sort of check exists, right? The Biden administration was able to get enough bipartisan Republican priorities into every spending bill that the Republicans, even when they controlled Congress, still pass at least continuing resolutions. We never had this level of shutdown. And that is how the system is at least supposed to work, is that you have this, the need to work with the opposition is a check on the worst excesses. And so again, when Trump does these kind of things that are so far out the norm that broad swaths of the opposition party mobilize and say, hey man, you can't do this. You actually have, again, you hope that this is an actual check on the administration's madness. Anyway, guys, hit subscribe. Thanks to Yanko Georgia, or thanks to Paul Wheeler, Michael Colleen, Jeff Davies, Francis Carius, Thomas Anche, and Gina Cuesta, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. Check us out, strikecom.com or at combatvetnews.com.